Our reading this morning is the same one Chris brought to us yesterday, so I include that today.
Today's Bible reading is from the book of Mark, chapter 1, verses 9 to 13. And it came to pass in those days that Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized of John in Jordan. And straightway coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens opened, and the Spirit like a dove descending upon him. And there came a voice from heaven saying, Thou art my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And immediately the Spirit driveth him into the wilderness. And he was there in the wilderness 40 days, tempted of Satan, and was with the wild beasts, and the angels ministered unto him.
What comes into your mind when you hear the words, led by the Spirit? Perhaps there are moments when I readily recognize this experience in my life. There have been times when someone has just randomly popped into my mind and I've felt this real urge to pray for them. And often, not every time, but often, I've later discovered that at the point where they popped into my mind, they were really struggling with something that needed that prayer. Coincidence? Possibly. I'm not really sure how you could prove it one way or the other. But I'd say it's probably more times than average. Or there was an occasion at my last church when I was walking past the building on a day off. There was a guy standing outside looking at our church notice board. Can I be honest and tell you I was tempted to just keep walking? It was my day off, I was tired, he didn't know who I was. But something made me stop and ask him if I could help. And he said, "Oh, I'm looking for this Andrew Jackson fellow whose name's on the board. Can you direct me to him?" And we got chatting, and it led to the start of something really good for the church, which is still going today. Of course, it's one thing to talk about the idea of being led when it all turns out to be a great success. Perhaps even when things have worked out despite me rather than because of me. I've no shortage of stories like that. But what about those moments where it doesn't work out? Where it all goes wrong? I can think of several of those in my life. And yes, there are some of them I can look back and think, whatever made you think that was a good idea? But equally, there are other times when I've acted in good faith, really sensed that this was the right thing to do, this is what God would want me to do, and I've wound up in places I'd really rather not be. Am I simply to assume I've been mistaken? That somewhere along the way I stepped out of God's plan for me? And okay, occasionally I may look back and see how I learned or grew through something. But is that not really just God somehow graciously making good come out of my mess? Or is God's leading a little more mysterious than we realize? In today's passage, we read of the Spirit sending Jesus out into the wilderness. The actual word used is Jesus being cast out into the wilderness. It's the same word that's used for what Jesus does with evil spirits elsewhere in Mark. It's like Jesus is thrust into something that's not of his own choosing. And it's quite telling that in much of the rest of Mark's gospel, Jesus is always very intentional, very active, very in control. But in these opening sections with his baptism and wilderness experience, the language is more passive. It's like stuff just happens to him. And there are times when life is just like that for us. When we find ourselves thrust into the midst of stuff we'd rather not face. And we can find ourselves wondering if it was something we did wrong. Or maybe God had abandoned us and forgotten us. But then my mind takes me to the famous, much-loved Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. And the Lord is his shepherd, guiding him in green pastures, still waters, and restoration. But the Lord is still his shepherd in the dark valleys. His presence is still there. He's still being guided. And so as I look back and I do think of lessons learned in darker places, maybe it wasn't just God making the best out of my mess-ups. Maybe I was following just as closely as when it all flowed. That's not to say I never have to search my heart to check if I haven't been wandering from God. We need discernment. But these days, I don't obsess about it so much. Because whether I feel like I'm going under, because like Peter on the water, I've taken my eyes off Jesus, or whether I'm like a sheep being led into and through a dark valley by a shepherd who is very close by, or whether I'm struggling to tell the difference and I just seem to be caught in the midst of circumstances outside my control. My security comes from the same place, from reaching out, calling out to the one who is good all the time, who never leaves me nor forsakes me, and to trust that he is good, that he is for me, and has never let me go. Have a blessed week.